I've never been exceptional at anything, and I want to say that plainly at the start, because I think a lot of videos like this soften that statement before they've even made it, turn it into something more manageable, add a but or a yet or some other qualifier that makes it easier to sit with. And I don't want to do that because the thing I'm trying to describe requires the statement to be honest, and the honest version is that I've moved through my whole life being okay at things, decent at things, fine at things, but never the person in the room who was clearly the best at something. Never the one people pointed to and said, yeah, he's got it. Never the person who had a thing that was theirs in that specific and recognizable way. And I want to talk about what that actually feels like to live inside, because I think it's common enough that a lot of people will recognize it, and specific enough that it rarely gets described honestly. Because when you're bad at something, it's almost easier. At least you have a clear problem. At least you can see the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and you can aim at closing it. There's something to work on, something to direct the effort toward. And when you're genuinely exceptional at something, you have this thing that grounds you, this part of your identity that's solid and confirmed, and that you can fall back on when everything else feels uncertain. You're the athlete, the musician, the artist, the person who codes, the person who writes, the person who just gets other people in a way that other people don't. You have something that tells you who you are in a specific and useful way. Something that when someone asks, "What are you into?" you actually have a real answer that means something beyond just a list of things you consume. Your thing gives you a place in the room, a way to understand yourself, a way to answer certain questions easily. Being average doesn't give you either of those things. You're not bad enough to have a clear gap to close, and you're not good enough to have something to fall back on. You're just sort of there, somewhere in the middle, doing okay at stuff. And the okayness of it is the problem, because it gives you nothing concrete to work with. You can't fix okay. There's no obvious next step when okay is where you are. You just stay in it and feel the vague dissatisfaction of it without having anything clear to point to as the source, which is its own specific kind of uncomfortable, because you can't even explain to anyone else why it's uncomfortable. From the outside, it looks fine. From the inside, it's this persistent, low-level thing that doesn't have a name and doesn't have a solution and just sits there. And I want to be specific about what I mean by never been good at anything, because I think there's a version of this that's false modesty, and there's a version that's actually real. And I'm talking about the real version. I'm not someone who has been objectively excellent at things and just can't recognize it. I'm someone who has genuinely tried a lot of different things over the years, who has put real effort into some of them, who has had real hope about some of them, and who has consistently landed somewhere in the middle, regardless of the effort or the hope or the wanting it to go differently. And the middle, after you've landed there enough times, stops feeling like a temporary state on the way to somewhere better and starts feeling like where you actually live. And there's a specific shift that happens when you start to understand that when the middle stops being the current situation and starts being the pattern. And that shift is one of the harder things I've had to process. The trying is where I want to start, because I think it's the core of what I'm describing. There's a specific kind of trying that isn't about being lazy or not caring or not putting in the work. It's the kind of trying where you genuinely put the effort in, where you show up and you work at it and you take it seriously, and the results just don't match what the effort deserved. You try something new and you have this window at the beginning where you don't know yet how it's going to go. And that window is actually kind of exciting. You can still be anything in that window. You could be the person who turns out to be naturally good at this, who picks it up fast, who has some hidden ability you didn't know about. There's a specific feeling in that early period of trying something new, where the possibility is real and open in a way it won't be, once you've been at it long enough to find out where you actually land. And that feeling is good, genuinely good, even if it's also a little precarious, because you know the window is going to close eventually, and you're going to find out, and then the window closes, and you find out. And most of the time, you land somewhere in the middle, And the middle is fine, but it's not what you are hoping for. And you have to decide what to do with that. And the decision of what to do with that doesn't get easier with repetition. If anything, it gets harder because each time it happens, you're adding to the pile of evidence about where you tend to land. And the pile gets heavier, and the weight of it is there every time you start something new. The feeling that comes with trying hard at something and not getting the results out that the effort should produce is one I want to try to describe accurately. You know the effort was real. You know you were genuinely trying and not just going through the motions or giving it less than it deserved. And the results just don't match what the effort should have produced. And you're sitting there looking at the gap between what you put in and what you got out, and you ask yourself what the point is. Because if trying hard doesn't produce the results, if the work isn't moving the needle in any visible way, then what exactly are you supposed to do with that? You can't try harder than hard. You're already doing the thing you're supposed to be doing and it's not working. And that specific combination of genuine effort and no result is one of the more demoralizing things I know of. And I mean that genuinely, not as a metaphor or an exaggeration. When you work at something and it doesn't respond, when the gap between you and the people who are actually good at it stays the same, or even gets wider no matter what you put in, it does something to your relationship, to effort in general, that's hard to undo. Because effort is supposed to be the mechanism. That's the story you absorb from the beginning, the thing you're told from every direction growing up, which is that if you work hard enough, you can get wherever you want to go. And you believe that for a long time because it's presented as fact, and because when you're young, you haven't accumulated enough evidence yet to question it seriously. And then you accumulate the evidence, and the evidence doesn't support the story, and you have to figure out what to do with the disconnect. The worst version of this is when you can see someone else getting better results from less effort. When you watch someone pick something up that you've been working at, and they're just immediately better at it, naturally, without the same struggle, and you've been putting in the time and they haven't, or they just started, and they're already ahead of where you are. In the unfairness of it, the complete indifference of natural ability to effort is something you know intellectually, but that hits differently every time you actually experience it up close. Because you want the thing that should work, which is trying hard, to be the thing that determines the outcome. And it's just not, or not reliably, and that is a genuinely hard reality to keep making peace with. What the repeated experience of trying and landing in the middle does over time is it starts to take something out of you, specifically your willingness to try in the first place, which sounds like giving up, and in some ways it is, but I also understand the logic of it from the inside, because the trying costs something real. It costs time and energy and the specific vulnerability of caring about an outcome. And if the cost is consistently higher than what you get back, you start to become reluctant to pay it again. You start to hedge. You start to not quite fully commit to things, because the not fully committing gives you an out, gives you something to point to when it doesn't work, gives you the ability to say, well, I wasn't really going all in on that anyway, which is more comfortable than having tried your hardest and still landed in the same place you always land. And the hedging becomes its own habit that you carry into new things without fully realizing you're doing it. You start something new and you're not giving it everything, because giving it everything and getting the same result as giving it less would be too much to sit with. So you hold something back, always a little something back, just enough to preserve the story that if you'd really tried, you might have done better. And that self-protection is rational, but it's also a tax you pay on every new experience, this small percentage of yourself that never fully shows up because it's too expensive to bring. I lost the will to try at certain things before I had the language to describe what was happening to me. I just noticed that I was less interested in starting things, less excited about new opportunities, quicker to conclude that something probably wasn't for me before I'd given it enough time to find out. And I think underneath all of that was this accumulated weight of all the previous times I'd tried and landed in the middle. All the previous times the effort hadn't produced what it should have. All the previous times I'd asked myself, what's the point? And not found a satisfying answer. The pattern had become clear enough that my brain was applying it before I'd even started, saving me the trouble of going through the whole cycle again, only to arrive at the same place I always arrived. And that preemptive conclusion that my brain had gotten ahead of the evidence and was already deciding how things were going to go before they happened was a kind of loss I didn't fully recognize as a loss while it was happening. The sports thing is where I felt this most acutely when I was younger, and I want to spend real time on it because it's one of the experiences that shaped this particular feeling for me, and one that a lot of people who grew up playing team sports will recognize immediately. I played sports as a kid. I liked playing. I genuinely wanted to be good at it, wanted it in the specific way that kids want things, without the self-consciousness or the hedging, just straight wanting with no qualifications. And I wasn't terrible. I could play. I understood the games. I was a decent enough teammate in terms of attitude and showing up and trying. But I was also clearly not one of the better players on any team I was on. And I knew it. And I suspect my teammates knew it. And that knowledge created this low-level awareness every single time I was on the field or the court that I was probably the weakest link in whatever was happening. And the specific feeling that comes with knowing you're probably pulling your team down is its own particular kind of uncomfortable that I don't think I've felt anywhere else quite as acutely. Because in school you can be average and it mostly just affects you. Your grade is your grade. Your performance is your performance. And the consequences of it belong to you alone. But in team sports, the context is collective. What you do or don't do affects everyone around you. And being the person who isn't carrying their weight in that collective context is not just disappointing to yourself, it's potentially letting other people down. People who are counting on you to do your part. People who in many cases are actually good at this, and who have a right to expect that their teammates are going to contribute something real to whatever is happening. And at that age, when the opinion of your teammates and your peers matters enormously, and you haven't yet built the defenses that come with getting older, that awareness of being the weak link was genuinely heavy to carry around. You're already in it, you're already committed, you can't just leave. So you have to play knowing that you're probably the reason something went wrong or is going to go wrong, and you have to hold that knowledge while also trying to perform, which is its own specific challenge on top of the general challenge of just playing. There were specific moments that I remember clearly from that time, moments where something happened on the field that was clearly because of me, where an opportunity was missed or a mistake was made that had visible consequences, and the immediate social fallout of that, the looks from teammates, the silence that was somehow louder than anything anyone said, the sense of having let something down that you couldn't take back. And I'd go home from those days carrying the specific weight of that, lying in bed going over the thing that happened, thinking about how if I'd been better it would have gone differently, feeling the gap between the athlete I wanted to be and the one I actually was in this acute and specific way that the general sense of being average doesn't quite capture. The general sense is diffuse. The specific moments are sharp. The thing about those sports moments specifically is that they happened in public, in front of your teammates, in front of the other team, sometimes in front of parents watching from the sidelines. And there's something about your inadequacy being witnessed by other people that makes it land differently than private failure does. Private failure, you can manage, you can contain it, you can decide how to interpret it and who gets to see it. Public failure in a team context, you can't manage at all. It just happens, right there, and everyone sees it, and you have to keep going anyway, keep playing, keep being in the situation that just demonstrated something about you that you didn't want demonstrated, and that you can't take back or explain away. And what that taught me, or what I took from it, even if it wasn't the right lesson, was that caring about being good at something and then finding out you're not good enough at it is a particular kind of pain that is hard to want to expose yourself to. Again, so you start to manage expectations in advance. You tell yourself you don't care that much about this thing before the outcome is decided, so that when the outcome confirms the middle, You've already pre-cushioned the landing. You develop this way of being in something and slightly outside it at the same time, which gives you distance from the disappointment, but also costs you the full experience of the thing. You become an expert at not quite trying, not quite committing, not quite caring enough that it can fully hurt you, which is its own kind of loss, because the things worth doing generally require you to actually care about them fully. The people around you who are good at things are their own specific challenge to navigate when you're in this experience. And I've thought about this a lot because the feeling of watching other people be clearly good at something while you're in the middle of figuring out where you land is one of the more complicated feelings to sit with. And it's more than just simple jealousy, or at least it's not only that. It's more like a reference point problem. When everyone around you is at roughly the same level, it's easy to feel okay about where you are. The middle is where everyone is, so the middle is normal, and normal is fine. But when someone near you is clearly exceptional at something, when they have that thing that you can see they have and that you can feel the absence of in yourself, it does something to how you evaluate your own position that's hard to stop, even when you understand what's happening. You're not comparing your performance to some abstract standard anymore. You're comparing it to a specific person you know, someone who exists in the same world you exist in, and who somehow managed to land somewhere you didn't land. And the proximity of it makes it more pointed than an abstract comparison would be. I've watched people I grew up with find their thing and build it into something. And I've had both genuine happiness for them and also this other thing running underneath it, this low-level awareness of the gap between where they are and where I am. This sense of being left behind that I don't know how to fully neutralize, even when I try. Because the left behind feeling is specifically about direction, about the sense that they are moving towards something in a way that's visible, and that I am moving toward something that isn't as clear to me or to anyone else. And that clarity they have sometimes feels like a kind of resource I don't have access to, like they received something early on that oriented them, and I didn't receive it, or received it too late, or received some version of it that didn't quite take. And there's a version of watching someone be good at things that I find particularly hard to sit with, which is the version where they make it look easy, where they don't seem to be working particularly hard at it, where the ability is just there, where you can see in how comfortable they look doing it that this is something that comes naturally to them in a way it doesn't come naturally to you. And you've been putting real effort into the same thing or a similar thing and getting a fraction of what they get out of it without the effort. And the effortlessness of it is the part that really gets you, you know, because you can make some kind of peace with someone outworking you, someone who got somewhere through more effort than you put in. That at least has a clear logic, but watching someone get somewhere with what looks like significantly less effort than you've been putting in, and getting more out of it, produces a specific kind of confusion that doesn't resolve cleanly and that stays with you longer than you'd like. The being left behind feeling is something I want to describe more carefully because it's not quite the same as jealousy, and it's not quite the same as resentment. It's specifically the feeling of having started at a similar point as someone having had roughly the same amount of time, and then watching the gap between where they ended up and where you ended up open over the years in a way you didn't expect. And the gap isn't their fault. They didn't take anything from you. They just moved in a direction that worked for them while you were still figuring out what direction you were supposed to move in. And the accumulation of those different trajectories over time has produced something that feels like a real distance that you're now looking across from your side of it. And there's a thing that happens when you watch someone you started alongside pull ahead of you, which is that the pulling ahead confirms something about you that you were hoping wasn't true. Every time someone around you lands somewhere better than you, every time the gap between their position and yours increases, it adds to the evidence on a side of the ledger you were hoping would stay lighter. It makes the pattern more established. And the more established the pattern is, the harder it is to believe it might not continue, which is why the left behind feeling builds over time in a way that's hard to reverse just by deciding to think about it differently. I want to talk about the hope thing honestly because I think the loss of hope is the part of this experience that hurts the most. When you're young, you genuinely have the hope, the real unguarded version of it, not yet worn down by the evidence. You have this sense that you're going to find your thing, that whatever you're doing now is just the stuff you're doing before the real thing reveals itself. And the real thing is going to be something you're actually good at, something that clicks in a way nothing has clicked yet, something that makes the previous years of being in the middle make sense as the lead up to the actual story. And you hold on to that hope for a long time, sometimes past the point where it's realistic to keep holding it, because it's the thing that makes the present feel okay. The present is just temporary. The thing is coming, and I want to be honest about how real that hope is when you have it. Because I think in retrospect, it's easy to dismiss it as naive. But the hope wasn't naive. It was a genuine belief that felt grounded at the time, that had reasons behind it, even if the reasons turned out not to be sufficient. You'd been told enough times that everyone has something they're good at, that if you keep trying, you'll find yours, that the thing you're looking for is real and findable if you just keep going. And you believed it because you wanted to believe it, and because nothing had yet conclusively told you otherwise. And then at some point, different for different people, the hope starts to quiet. You've tried enough things and landed in the middle enough times and watched enough time pass that the story about the real thing still coming gets harder to sustain. You've been waiting for it long enough that the waiting itself starts to feel like part of the answer. Maybe this is just how it is. Maybe the middle is where you live. Maybe the version of yourself you are expecting to arrive is just not going to show up in the form you are expecting. And making that adjustment, giving up the story about what's coming and looking honestly at the reality of what is its own kind of grief, even though nobody would necessarily recognize it as grief from the outside. You haven't lost anything specific you can point to. You've lost a version of the future that you were counting on, and that's a real loss even when it's invisible. And I want to be honest that I haven't fully made that adjustment. I'm somewhere in between, somewhere between still holding on to the hope that something is going to click and starting to accept that maybe it just doesn't work like that for everyone. That maybe the thing I'm looking for doesn't exist in the clean form I've been looking for it in. And that in-between place is uncomfortable to inhabit, but it's also where I actually am. And pretending to have resolved it in either direction would be dishonest. There's also the version of this that shows up in comparison to specific people in your life rather than to some abstract standard. And that version is the one I find most difficult to navigate, because you can't just distance yourself from it the way you can from an abstract comparison. When the person you're measuring yourself against is someone you see regularly, someone whose life you have detailed information about, someone whose progress you watch in real time, the gap between where they are and where you are is vivid and specific and hard to not think about even when you're trying not to think about it. I've had this with people I grew up with, people I went to school with, people I played sports with, people who I started at roughly the same place as and who have ended up somewhere that looks very different from where I am. And looking at where they are now and doing the math on how much distance has accumulated, that math is uncomfortable to do, but your brain does it anyway, automatically, without you asking it to. And the result of the math is just sitting there being the result. And you have to figure out what to do with it. And most of the time, what you do with it is just carry it, because there's no better option that's available. What I find hardest is the people who have figured out what they're good at and have been building in that direction for long enough that momentum has built up behind them. They've been going in a specific direction for long enough that each year adds to what the previous years produced, and you can see the compounding of it in how their life looks now compared to how it looked a few years ago. And you're still trying to figure out the direction, and the contrast between the compounding of their progress and the stagnation of the figuring out is like a lot to sit with on the days when it's most visible. There's a specific kind of disappointment in yourself that I want to try to describe because I think it's the emotional core of what I'm talking about. And it's different from the other kinds of disappointment that are also present in this experience. The disappointment at specific outcomes, the disappointment at specific efforts that didn't pay off, the disappointment at watching other people be somewhere you aren't. This one is more fundamental. It's about the person you expected to be and the person you actually are, and the gap between those two things that you have to look at with some regularity, whether you want to or not. Because somewhere in you, there's a version of yourself that you expected to arrive at. A version you maybe couldn't fully articulate, but that you had some sense of, some picture of what you were going to be when you got older, what you were going to be good at, what was going to be yours in this specific and real way. And you get to a point where you look at the actual version of yourself and the expected version, and the gap between them is real and specific and has to be dealt with. And what you want to do with it, ideally, is close it, work on it, figure out what you need to do to get from here to there. But sometimes the gap feels so wide and the path across it feels so unclear that you don't even know where to start. And then you're just sitting with the disappointment without any clear way to do anything about it. And the version of this disappointment that I find hardest is when you've tried. When the disappointment isn't because you didn't make the effort, when you can't even tell yourself that you just need to work harder because you've been working hard and it's not producing what you hoped. And so the only honest conclusion left is that working harder might not be enough. That maybe the gap between the expected version and the actual version isn't just a matter of effort. That you might have tried your best, and your best might just be okay. And sitting with that conclusion is one of the harder things I've had to do because it doesn't give you anything to push against. You can't just decide to try harder. You've tried, and the trying isn't closing the gap the way it's supposed to. There's the question of what you do with the will to try when the trying has produced enough nothing that the will is running low. And this is where the honest description of this experience gets difficult. Because the easy version of the answer is just keep trying. Just don't give up. Just stay in it long enough and something will happen. And maybe that's true for some people, but for the people who've been staying in it for a long time and accumulating evidence that staying in it isn't producing what they were hoping for, the easy version of the answer doesn't quite hold. It sounds like something you say to someone who hasn't been at it as long as you have, who hasn't yet seen enough repetitions of the pattern to understand what pattern they're in. What I've actually found is that the will to try doesn't just run out all at once. It depletes gradually in proportion to the number of times the trying hasn't produced. And you can feel it depleting, which is its own specific experience, because you're watching yourself become less capable of the optimism that trying requires, without being able to stop it from happening. You want to be the person who keeps showing up with full investment and full hope and full belief that this time the results are going to match the effort. And you're watching yourself become the person who shows up with hedged investment and managed expectations. Because those are the adjustments that make the inevitable landing in the middle hurt less. And the adjustment is rational, but it's also a loss, because the full version of trying is more alive than the hedged version. The social part of this is something I want to talk about because I think it's one of the parts that costs the most in practice. When you're average at things and the people around you are good at things, you develop a specific way of moving through group situations that's different from how people who are good at things move through them. You're more aware of what you're contributing relative to what other people are contributing. You're quicker to remove yourself from situations where you might be visibly the weakest person in the room. You're more careful about which things you put yourself forward for and which things you stay quiet about, because you've learned through enough experiences which direction things tend to go when you put yourself forward. And that caution, that careful management of your own exposure is exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't do it. Because you're doing it all the time, in every situation, this constant background calculation of where you are relative to everyone else. And whether this is a situation where being yourself is going to cost you something, And the people who are good at things, who have the thing, who are comfortable in their position, they don't have to do that calculation. They just show up and be themselves. And the being themselves tends to work out okay. And the contrast between the ease of their presence and the effortfulness of yours is something you feel even when you can't quite articulate it. There's also the experience in group situations, where everyone seems to have figured out what they're good at, and you're the one who hasn't. The conversation will turn to what people are working on, what they're excited about, what they're developing. And everyone seems to have something to say that's real and specific, and you're trying to find a version of your answer that doesn't reveal how much of your time is spent feeling like you're in between things rather than actually in something. And you develop answers that are true, but that are the most favorable true version of your situation. And you become good at producing them, and the producing of them feels like its own kind of performance that costs something on top of everything else. The sports thing and what I'm describing now connect in a way that I've thought about over the years, because sports gave me very clear and immediate feedback about where I stood relative to other people. Feedback that you can't really misinterpret or explain away. When the ball goes past you, it goes past you. When the play breaks down because of something you did, it breaks down visibly and in front of everyone. The feedback is real-time and public and attached to specific moments you can remember. And it builds up a very clear picture over time of where you actually are in the distribution of people who are good at things. And I think some part of me took that picture and applied it beyond sports, started using it as evidence about my general position in the world. And that move may or may not have been accurate, but it happened, and it changed how I approached new things afterward. Because once you have a clear picture of yourself as someone who is probably not going to be the best at things, that picture accompanies you into every new thing you try. It doesn't stay in the domain where it was built. It becomes a general expectation that you carry. And the general expectation shapes how you show up and what you're willing to invest and how you interpret the early feedback. And the early feedback in any new thing is usually ambiguous enough that you could read it either way. And the person with the positive expectation tends to read it positively and keep going. And the person with the negative expectation tends to read it negatively and pull back. And those two responses produce very different outcomes over time in a way that has almost nothing to do with the actual underlying ability. What I found, slowly and without it resolving into anything clean, is that the experience of never being exceptional at anything is as much about the relationship to the trying as it is about the results of the trying. And by that I mean the results are real and they matter. I'm not trying to wave them away. But there's a secondary thing that happens alongside the results, which is about how you relate to your own effort and your own potential and your own position in the world. And that secondary thing builds in its own direction, regardless of what the results are actually doing. The secondary thing is the story you tell yourself about what the results mean. And the story you tell yourself when you've tried and landed in the middle enough times tends to become a story about the kind of person you are. And once that story is established, it's very hard to act outside of it, because the story is what you're consulting every time a new situation comes up. You're not approaching new things fresh. You're approaching them through the filter of everything you've already concluded about yourself. And what you've already concluded is that you tend to land in the middle regardless of what you put in. And that conclusion is waiting for you in every new situation before the situation has had a chance to tell you anything different. And I think that's maybe the most honest description of what this experience actually costs over the long term. Not just the individual experiences of trying and not getting enough out, not just the specific moments of public failure, not just the watching of other people be somewhere you're not, but the way all of those things accumulate over time into a story, and the story becomes the lens, and the lens changes how you see every new thing that comes up. And changing the lens is much harder than just trying harder would be, because the lens is built out of years of experience, and it has a weight and a consistency to it that individual new experiences have a hard time dislodging. I still feel all of this. I want to be clear about that because I think a video like this, about a feeling like this, has an expectation attached to it that it's going to end somewhere better than it started, that the arc of it is going to be toward resolution. And the honest version is that I'm still in it. I'm still the person who tries things and lands in the middle. I'm still the person who watches other people have their thing and feels the specific weight of not having mine. I'm still the person who has the hope and loses some of it and reconstructs some of it and loses some of it again in this cycle that doesn't seem to have a clean ending. What I have now that I didn't have earlier is a clearer picture of what the experience actually is. And I think that's worth something, even when it doesn't change the experience itself. I understand better now that the middle isn't necessarily a temporary condition I'm passing through on the way to somewhere else. Or at least it might not be, and accepting that possibility without fully surrendering to it is where I live most of the time. I understand that the disappointment in yourself is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously. I understand that the loss of hope is a real loss even when it's invisible, even when nothing specific has ended. And I think if I'm being fully honest, what I'm still looking for is some way to make peace with where I am that doesn't feel like giving up on where I wanted to be. That distinction matters to me, the difference between accepting the middle and settling for it. And I haven't found the version of acceptance that doesn't feel like settling. Maybe that's the thing I'm still working toward. Maybe the thing I've never been good at is this specific kind of acceptance, learning to value the doing of something without needing it to produce proof of greatness, learning to find meaning in the middle rather than treating it as a failure to escape. And the irony of that being the remaining challenge is its own thing to sit with. There's a version of this that lives specifically in the question of identity, and I want to spend some time on it because I think it's actually at the root of a lot of what I've been describing. When you're good at something, that something becomes part of how you understand yourself. It's not just a skill or an activity, it's a piece of your identity that you carry around and that tells you something about who you are. And other people use it to identify you too, You become the athlete, the writer, the one who's good at math, the creative one. Those identities do real work in your life and in how other people relate to you. When you don't have that, when nothing has stuck well enough to become the thing you're identified by, the identity question is harder. Someone asks what you're into and you give them an answer that's true, but that doesn't quite feel like you have a thing. You watch shows, you listen to music, you go out sometimes, you work out. These are all things that a person does, but none of them add up to a thing that you are in that recognizable way. And the absence of that is more than just a conversational inconvenience. It creates this genuine uncertainty about who you actually are at the core, because the things you're good at are one of the main ways you understand yourself, and without them, the understanding is hazier than you'd like. And one of the real costs of being average at everything is what it does to your sense of self over time. Not in a crisis way, but in this gradual erosion of the clear picture you have of yourself. When you were young, you had potential as a placeholder for a specific identity that hadn't formed yet. Potential works fine for a while. It gives you something to point to. It gives other people something to point to when they talk about you. It gives you a story about who you're going to be even when you're not yet that person. And then you get older, and the potential needs to start converting into something actual, and if it doesn't convert, you're left with the placeholder without the thing it was supposed to be holding the place for. And that's an uncomfortable position that gets more uncomfortable as time goes on. There's also the experience of actively looking for the thing. The looking isn't just passively waiting for something to click. It involves actually trying things, which requires a certain amount of hope and openness and willingness to invest. And that's already asking a lot if you've been through enough cycles of trying and landing in the middle. The looking involves staying interested in new possibilities, past the point where you've accumulated enough evidence to be skeptical of new possibilities. The looking involves believing on some level that the thing is actually out there for you to find. Because if you don't believe that, the looking becomes pointless and you stop. And I've had periods where I believed that and periods where I didn't. The periods where I believed it were better obviously. They had more energy and more forward motion and more of the feeling of actually going somewhere. And the periods where I didn't had this flat quality where nothing felt worth trying, because the trying felt like going through the motions of looking for something that probably wasn't there. And getting from the second kind of period back to the first kind requires something to happen that restores the belief. And I don't always know how to make that happen deliberately. The looking also involves a specific kind of discomfort, which is the discomfort of being seen trying things at an age where you feel like you should already know. When you're young and you're trying different activities and sports and classes, that's normal. Everyone's doing it. No one thinks anything of it. But when you're older and you're still actively trying to figure out what you're good at and what you're genuinely into, there's a slight social awkwardness to it. You're aware that some people already have this figured out. You're aware that the trying feels more visible than it would have felt a few years ago. And so the looking itself gets self-conscious in a way that makes it harder, because you're doing it with this low-level awareness of being behind where you should be. The school context is where I want to spend some time, because I think for a lot of people, this is where the average feeling first registers in a specific and undeniable way. Because school is one of the places where performance is measured and ranked and made explicit, where you can't really avoid knowing where you stand, because the grades and the tests and the assignments all give you real-time feedback about how you're doing relative to what's expected. And being average in school, genuinely average, rather than performing below your potential, or just not applying yourself, being average, when you're actually trying, has a specific quality to it. You do the work, you study for the tests, you try to follow along in class, and you get the B's and the C's that represent your honest best, and you watch other people get the A's without seeming to try as hard, or you watch people who are working as hard as you are and getting more out of it. And the comparison is built into the environment in a way that makes it unavoidable. And I think school is where a lot of people first absorb the story about what their ceiling might be. You run enough tests and get enough feedback, and after a while you have a pretty clear picture of what the typical outcome looks like for the level of effort you're putting in. And that picture, built in school, tends to travel with you into things beyond school, even when the domains are completely different, because your brain doesn't always distinguish between what you learned about yourself in one context and what might be true in another. There's also the version of this that lives in creative things specifically, because creative things, art and music and writing and whatever else falls in that category, are things that a lot of people turn to when they're looking for their thing. They feel like the domain where the conventional measures of ability don't apply as directly, where you might find something that resonates with you in a way that more structured activities didn't. And sometimes that's true, and people do find their thing in creative work. And sometimes it's not true, and you spend months working at something creative and land in the same middle you land in everywhere else, which is particularly deflating because you'd hoped this was going to be different. I've had experiences like that, trying creative things with a specific hope that this was going to be the one that clicked, and finding out that I could do it okay, that I could produce something that was competent and maybe occasionally good, but not exceptional, and that the gap between what I made and what people who were actually good at it made was visible and real, and not going away no matter how much I worked at it. And creative work is one of those areas where the distance between okay and actually good is sometimes the most visible, because you can consume so much of the work of people who are actually good at it, and you have a clear reference point for what the real version looks like. And what you're making is measurably not the real version. And then there's what you do in the meantime, in the time between trying things and finding out where you land. You have to exist in your life in the in-between period, in the period when you don't have the thing yet, and you're still figuring out if there's a thing to be found. And existing in that in-between period, without it consuming you entirely, requires some kind of structure or direction or meaning, and finding that when you don't have the clear thing to organize around is its own challenge. Some people fill it with busyness, with just being occupied enough that the absence of the thing isn't the most prominent feature of their life. Some people fill it with the looking itself, turning the search into the thing, making the trying of new activities the organizing principle of the period. Some people fill it with the things they are decent at, even if they're not exceptional, building a life around the okay stuff rather than waiting for the exceptional stuff. And I've done all three of these at different points, and none of them fully resolves the underlying thing, but they're all better than just sitting in the absence and feeling it directly, which is the other option. There's a version of this that specifically lives in work, and it's slightly different from the general version I've been describing, but related enough that I want to touch on it. Because at some point, you're in a professional environment, and the question of what you're good at becomes more concrete and more consequential than it was when you were just trying activities. Now, your livelihood is partially organized around the things you're able to do well, and being average at most things in that context has practical implications beyond just the emotional ones. And the work context adds a dimension to the average feeling that the general version doesn't have, which is the comparison to specific people you work alongside who are clearly better at the professional things than you are. Not abstractly better, concretely better in ways that get noticed and rewarded and that produce visible outcomes. And you're watching that happen in real time every day and doing the work of processing what it means about you and your position and where you're likely to end up. The question of whether the thing even exists for you is one I want to sit with for a minute, because it's a question that most people who have been in this experience have had at some point, and that's genuinely hard to say out loud. The area of genuine ability and interest and engagement where I could actually be good rather than just, okay, does it exist for me? Specifically, or is it possible that I'm just someone for whom that particular combination isn't going to happen? And that's a genuinely uncomfortable question to hold, because the honest answer is, I don't know. And not knowing means you have to keep acting as though the answer might be yes, while being aware that the answer might be no. And that combination is hard to sustain over a long period of time. And I think there are people for whom the thing exists and gets found, and there are people for whom it never quite comes together into something clear, and you don't always know which kind of person you are until enough time has passed that the answer is more visible than it was earlier. And if you're in the earlier part of that, if you haven't accumulated enough evidence yet to know which kind of person you are, the uncertainty is its own kind of difficult to live with, because you can't just decide which it is and act accordingly. You have to keep the uncertainty open and keep moving inside of it and see what the accumulation of more time and more trying produces. What I've landed on, for now, and without a lot of confidence in it, is that the thing might be less about finding one specific area of exceptional ability and more about finding a combination of things you're good enough at that together produce something that feels like yours. Like no single component is exceptional, but the specific combination, the way they work together in a particular context, produces something that at least feels more like a thing than any individual component does on its own. And that's a much less satisfying version of the story than the one where you find your thing and everything clicks. But it might be closer to what's actually available to some people. And accepting the version that's actually available is better than holding out for the version that might not be. The timing question is something I think about a lot, because there's a version of this experience where the timing is the actual issue more than the underlying ability, where the thing exists but you haven't run into it yet in the right way or at the right moment or with the right context around you. And the not having found it yet is a function of where you are in your life rather than a function of whether it's findable. And I genuinely don't know if that's the version I'm in or not, but holding it as a possibility matters because it changes how you orient toward the search. There are people who found their thing really young, like 12 or 13 years old, and you can see in the way they are in the world that having had that clarity for that long has given them something that's hard to manufacture in other ways. They have this settled quality, this sense of having known what they were doing and who they were for long enough that it's become structural. And then there are people who found their thing in their 20s or 30s or even later, who spent time in the middle, and then something clicked, and they describe the clicking with this sense of genuine surprise, like it arrived when they'd mostly stopped expecting it. And then there are people who never quite found it in that clear form and built something real out of the collection of things they were decent at. And I don't know which of those I'm going to be. And I think not knowing is actually the honest state to be in at this point, because the alternative to not knowing is deciding prematurely which one I am, and deciding prematurely that I'm the third kind, the one who never quite finds it, closes off the possibility that I might be the second kind, the one who finds it later. And I'm not ready to close that off. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on how you think about it. Because the decision to stop looking is its own kind of loss, and I'd rather carry the uncertainty than make the loss final before it has to be. There's also the version of this that lives in the conversations you have with people who do have their thing. When someone who is genuinely good at something talks about that thing, there's a specific energy in how they talk about it. They light up. They go deeper than they needed to. They could have given you the surface version and moved on, but they don't. They keep going because the thing is genuinely interesting to them in a way that makes them lose track of the conversational norms around not going on too long about stuff. And there's something genuinely good about being around that, about watching someone be lit up by what they do. And there's also this other thing underneath it, this awareness that you don't have the equivalent, that there's no question someone could ask you that would produce that same quality of response. And you become good at deflecting those questions or at giving answers that are technically accurate, but that don't quite reveal the absence underneath. Someone asks what you're passionate about, and you give them the most energized version of your interest in something you're actually only moderately interested in, because the alternative is saying, I'm not sure I have one of those, and watching them not know what to do with that. And the deflection works socially. It keeps the conversation moving, but it also has a cost, because every time you do it, you're creating a small distance between the version of you that's being presented and the actual version, and that distance accumulates over time in a way that makes you feel slightly less real in the interactions than you'd like to feel. The comparison to yourself over time is something I haven't talked about, and I want to, because I think it's one of the more honest versions of what this experience involves. Because you're not only comparing yourself to other people, you're also comparing yourself to earlier versions of yourself, to the things you hoped at a younger age that would be true by now, to the progress you expected to make and haven't quite made in the ways you expected to make it. And that comparison to your own expectations of yourself is in some ways harder than the comparison to other people, because there's no external factor to blame. The person who expected things of you and the person who didn't meet those expectations are the same person, and reconciling those two versions of yourself is something you have to do internally without anyone else's help. And I've had moments where I looked at where I am relative to where I expected to be and felt this very specific kind of quiet, which isn't sadness exactly and isn't anger exactly. It's more like a reckoning, like the honest moment where you stop telling the story that you're almost there or you're close or you're just a couple of things away from where you wanted to be, and you actually look at the real distance between the current version and the expected version, and you just sit with it for a minute. And those moments are uncomfortable, but I also think they're necessary because you can't actually figure out where you're going until you're clear about where you actually are. The experience of being average at things also produces a specific relationship to other people's success that's worth describing honestly. When someone around you succeeds at something, when they find their thing or they get the result or they hit the milestone, the response you have is usually mixed. There's the genuine part, the part that's actually happy for them, that recognizes that their success doesn't take anything from you and that you want good things for the people in your life. And then there's the other part, the part that does the comparison automatically and registers the gap, and that part isn't resentment so much as it's just pain. The pain of being reminded of the gap. The pain of watching someone be somewhere you wanted to be. And those two things sit together in a way that's uncomfortable to acknowledge, because the genuine part is supposed to be the whole of it, and the pain part feels like something you shouldn't have. But most people who've been in this experience have that mixed response and don't fully admit to it. And not admitting to it means you can't really process it, and not processing it means it just sits there building up. And I'd rather just say it plainly. When people I know succeed at things I wanted to succeed at, I feel genuinely happy for them, and I also feel something else that's about me and my position and the gap. And both of those things are real, and both of them deserve to be acknowledged, even if the second one is less flattering. There's the version of this where someone asks you what you're good at, and you have to answer in real time without being able to prepare. And this is one I've thought about because it happens, and it's always slightly uncomfortable in a way that's hard to disguise. You know you're supposed to have an answer. You know the normal thing is to have something to say that sounds real and specific and confident, and you're trying to figure out in real time what the honest version of your answer is that also doesn't make the conversation weird. And I've gotten reasonably good at producing acceptable answers to this question. You know, answers that are true in a technical sense, but that present the most favorable version of the situation. But what I've never gotten is the version where I can answer that question with the kind of certainty and ease that people who actually have their thing have when they answer it. They don't have to think about it. The answer is just there, immediately available, because it's been true for long enough that it's just part of how they describe themselves. And the contrast between the ease of their answer and the effort of mine is something I'm aware of even when they're not. I want to talk about what happens when you try something and you're actually okay at it, maybe even better than okay at it, but you don't love it. Because I think this is one of the underappreciated versions of the thing I'm describing. You find something you can do reasonably well, and you feel the pull to just commit to that, to make that the thing even if it doesn't quite feel like the thing, because at least it's something. And the temptation is real, and I've given into it at different points, decided to just commit to what I can do rather than keep looking for what I love. What I've found is that being good at something you don't love is its own kind of uncomfortable that's different from being average at everything. Because now you have the ability, but you're using it on something that doesn't feel like yours, that doesn't produce the feeling of being in the right place, doing the right thing. And you're aware of the gap between what you're doing and what you'd be doing if you were doing the thing that actually lit you up. And that gap is present every time you're in it, which is different from not knowing, which is different from the middle. The middle at least has the openness of not being defined yet. And then there's the version where you try something, land in the middle, but notice that landing in the middle of this particular thing feels different from landing in the middle of other things, where the middle isn't a disappointment, but almost a kind of discovery, where you find out that you can be decent at something, and that being decent at it is actually okay, is actually worth continuing with, because the being decent at it produces something that matters to you beyond the performance level. And I think those moments are actually important even when they're not the greatness you were looking for, because they're pointing at something real about what you value and what you want to keep doing, regardless of how you compare to the people at the top of it. What I've thought about a lot lately is the difference between being good at something and finding meaning in something, and how often those two things get confused in the way I've been thinking about the whole question of what I'm good at. Like I've been orienting toward finding the thing I'm good at as though that's the primary question, as though being good at something is what would make it feel like mine. And I think that might actually be the wrong orientation, or at least not the only orientation, because there are things I've found meaningful that I'm not exceptional at, and the meaning has been real even without the greatness. And maybe the question isn't as much about what I'm good at as it is about what I want to keep doing and building and being in, regardless of where I land on the performance curve relative to other people. That's not a resolution to what I've been describing. The feeling of being average at everything is still real, and it still costs something, and the watching of other people have their thing still hits the way it hits. But I think it might be pointing toward a different question than the one I've been asking. Less, what am I exceptional at? And more, what do I want to keep doing anyway, even when I'm not exceptional at it? And finding the answer to that second question, even if it doesn't produce the greatness I was looking for, might be closer to the thing I was actually looking for all along than I understood while I was looking. I've never been exceptional at anything, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that. But the what to do with it is starting to look less like finding the thing where I'm exceptional and more like figuring out what I want to be in, regardless of where I land. And maybe that's growth, or maybe it's just an accommodation and I genuinely can't tell the difference from the inside. But it's where I am, and it's the most honest version of the ending I can give this. There's one more thing I want to try to describe, which is what it's like to watch someone younger than you be better at something than you are. Because this is a version of the experience that has its own specific character, and I haven't talked about it yet. When someone your own age is better than you at something, you can at least tell yourself that you've had the same amount of time and they've just used it differently. There are stories you can tell that give you some distance from it. But when someone clearly younger than you, someone with less time and less experience and less of everything that should translate into skill, is already better than you are, the distance disappears completely. The story you were telling collapses, and what you're left with is just the gap presented in its most unflattering form. I felt this in sports specifically, where age and experience are supposed to count for something, where the time you've put in is supposed to show up in how you play. And then you're in a situation with someone who is 2 or 3 years younger, and they're just better, obviously better, in a way that everyone can see, and you have to play alongside them or against them and process what that means while also trying to perform. And what it means, or what I took it to mean, was that the time I'd put in had produced less than the time they hadn't yet put in, and that equation is hard to sit with and harder to explain away. And I think that specific version of the experience, watching someone younger be better, is one of the things that most strongly shaped my sense that there might just be something about me that wasn't going to catch up regardless of the time I put in. That it wasn't a matter of having started later or needing more time. That the ceiling might just be where it was and the time wasn't going to change it in the way I was hoping it would. There's also the version of this that happens when you try something for the first time as an adult and find out you're actually decent at it. Maybe better than decent. And for a moment you think, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the thing. And that moment is good. Genuinely good. And then the next part happens where you get around other people who have been doing it for a while, and you see very quickly where you actually land in that room. And the landing is the same place you always land. And you have to process that while also managing the specific disappointment of having had the hope again and then watched it resolve the same way it always resolves. And I think that cycle, the hope arriving and then the landing in the middle and then the processing and then the carrying on and then eventually the hope arriving again when something new presents itself, is maybe the most accurate description of what this experience actually looks like lived from the inside. Not a single moment of realizing you're average, not a crisis, just a recurring cycle of hope and landing and carrying on that runs in the background of your life, underneath everything else as this ongoing feature of being you. And what you're doing in between the cycles is just living your life, working, spending time with people, doing the things you do, and the cycle is there, but it's not all there is. There are days when it's not prominent at all, when other things are more present, and the question of what you're good at isn't the one your brain is most occupied with. And those days are good. And then something happens that brings the cycle back to the front. A new opportunity or a moment of watching someone else do something well, or a question someone asks that you don't quite know how to answer. And there it is again. I don't think the cycle ends, or at least I haven't seen evidence that it ends. I think you just get more practiced at moving through it, more familiar with the specific weight of each part of it, more able to be in the middle and the landing and the carrying on without it using up as much of you as it did when it was newer. And maybe that's what getting through something like this actually looks like, not a resolution, just a gradual familiarity with the shape of it and an increasing ability to carry it without it being the only thing you're carrying. I've never been exceptional at anything. That's still true, and I'm still figuring out what to do with it. And I think that combination, the ongoing truth of it and the ongoing figuring out of what to do with it, is probably just going to be part of how I am for a while. And I'm okay with that being the ending, because the alternative endings all require pretending I'm somewhere I'm not.